Well, good morning. At least it's morning in the U.S. It might be afternoon there if you're in Europe. I have viewers from all around the globe watching us. Welcome. We're back to
Yes.
the ITAM Kitchen. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 a.m. We like to stir things up. I was talking with a good buddy of mine. Actually, Patrick, he's been on before. You know
Oh
Patrick.
yeah.
So I was talking to Patrick yesterday. He says, Bill, he says, I love the ITM Kitchen. He says, I can't wait to get back on it. He says, I'm kind of busy because he's doing a
Yeah.
project right now. Right. But he says, I love it because it's the only place where you can have open dialogue and everyone's interacting. I
Yeah.
loved it. It was a mic drop operator. It's like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I want to leverage that. But I say that because it's true, right? The opportunity to have that open discussion. You're seeing Rob and I talk a lot. Shoot, we do this just on our own, and now everyone else is seeing it.
Yeah.
They go, "Oh my gosh, this is magical stuff." It's that,
Mhm.
it's that ability to say, "Oh wow, what's the secret sauce?" It's not a secret sauce. It's about just how you apply it, right? And and today, as we go on that, hey, there's no telling what tangent I'll go under sometimes. There you go. Uh, Today
Okay.
we're going to, yeah. Today we're going to talk about the accidental CMDB. Again, we have environments, we have a bank, we have an insurance institution, both going from other applications to Freshworks, right? And have the insurance company is going from ServiceNow to Freshworks, and the bank is actually going from Sherrywell to Freshworks. And the
Yeah.
asset manager, those who are doing asset management software, asset management, have been told, oh, by the way, you're not doing anything else. Just add the CMDB to your plate, and you're going to implement that too. So there you go. Very similar scenarios, and these are real scenarios, by the way. So we're working through it. And Rob said, I went to Rob. I was like, Rob, here's the challenge. He says, I'm on. Let's do it. Let's start having the sessions. Hence
Yeah.
the
Totally.
entire month of April. Right?
Yeah.
We're having a lot of fun. But before I go too much further, Rob, introduce yourself, and we'll continue on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. I'm Rob Collins, and I'm an ITAM practitioner for going on 30 plus years actually in the industry, from my time when I was in the Marines in the late 80s all the way through until, let me see, experience with two state of Florida government agencies over the course of like 26 years, and then another 5 years on top of that in a private consulting firm. Glad to be with you all today, and let's discuss.
No, absolutely. Because today's topics, because we've been hitting a lot of great topics as we move forward, right? We've
Mhm.
talked about the data, we've talked about discovery, we've talked about how you're doing a reconcile, how you're going to do normalization. I'll say normalization,
Yes.
I'll throw that in there. We didn't say normalization, but really that was part of what some of the topics. And today,
Challenge.
it's about policy, right? How
Yeah.
are we going to start? Everyone says the mandate policy. And Rob and I were talking about this after our session on Monday. I said, there's one thing that you've got to be careful when we talk about policy.
Mhm.
It's like when you have to become the enforcer, right? Because when you become the police, no one wants to be policed in their job, right? But when you encourage someone to say, you know what, and they get enthusiastic, it's like, oh my gosh, this is how I helped a job, and now I see what this policy, and I see the rules or
Mhm.
guidelines. You have the guidelines you put in place, so it actually helps me as well. Then they became enthusiastic, right?
Mhm.
That's what comes to mind for me with the policy. But what's it for you, Rob? That's again, that's just looking at different organizations, large, small, etc. Everyone hates policy because one is they're hard to write. Figure out what type of standard you want to go towards, and number two, people don't want to read them. They want to do their day job, right?
Yeah, they don't want to do it necessarily, but policy is important because it does a few things. One, it controls behavior and it controls access within your environment. It also enables people, they don't realize this oftentimes, but it enables them, right, by giving them avenues of approach for different aspects of the job. And you have to put those guardrails in place often for a variety of reasons, which almost go without saying, but we'll say some anyway. Like, for instance, information security, cybersecurity, for instance, and data access. If you look at a lot of the various standards and the regulations that are out there, and you
Mm-hmm.
look at typical policy structures in just about any organization, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice that they kind of
Oh,
align to each other, right? And then in and around policy, and if whether or not it's a good policy is one, whether or not it's something which can be adhered to. It's possible for people to stick with the policy, to use it, operate within it. Two, the policy has somewhere metrics that it can rely upon in order to determine the effectiveness of that policy. And then one of the others is three, the enforceability of the policy, because if you can't measure it, you can't enforce it, why is it policy then? There's no point in it, really. You don't want waste in the environment. You don't want policy that does nothing. There's no point. There's no purpose to it. So, and that's just a good start, I think, on the conversation.
Well, it is, because when you think about, to me, when I think about policy, I relate that to government regulations.
Yeah.
And when we think about when you have to have diplomats make decisions on how to do their job, or how for other people to do their job, right? The question is, okay, is this valid, not valid? And people can go debate for that forever, and I'm not trying to make a political discussion. That's not the purpose. But when I think about government regulations, I'll give an example. So today in the U.S., right, we have a lot of enforcement, I'll use it, around software. A lot. I did something a couple of years ago talking about the 90-day software inventory. The government required within 90 days to say, okay, tell me all the software you have, because they want to know the version. It was a big effort. It was a really big effort, right? But they did it because the government agencies were out of compliance. So they made a government mandate saying, okay, report upon it. Was it successful? Sort of. And I say sort of because here's what happened. Having a close relative of mine who's actually in the military, who had to report upon this, is interesting insight. And he said, Bill, we did it. That's great. Did we pay attention to all the compliance and everything? No, that's not what was in the policy. We gave them what was good enough. There's your thing, right? So how you interpret that policy is also important, because, again, how can you get folks on board when other individuals, at least for me, when you talk about policy, right? The only way that you can have an effective policy is you build it with the team that needs to apply it. They're part of the contribution. They're part of the team. They have a say in this. There's partial ownership, and there's something to be said for that, right?
Yes, there is.
I mean, how often do we just we get slapped on the hand, okay, you need to go do X, Y, and Z. No one else is involved. Mm-hmm. It's rhetoric, right? I don't know if you want to take it anywhere. It's just what comes to mind for me, Rob.
Yeah, I can actually. And I can say for sure, that's going to help to build the team and to build trust and to build that sort of like the camaraderie among all the different silos, if you will, especially if you bring them to the table and say, we've got a job. The job today is we need to develop policy around fill in the blank, right? And then give the team opportunities, let's say, to point out like what needs to be addressed with the policy, how you go about doing it, everything that has to do with policy making, right? And when they get their participation in, they also kind of share in the ownership of it, right? And by doing that, they also sort of bring together all those considerations around the table that maybe an individual wouldn't have come up with entirely on their own. Mm-hmm. And so in this way, the development of policy is a really good exercise for a group of folks that are doing this for the organization.
See, for me, I love to bring people together anyways. That's just me. Yeah. Everyone's different. But as asset management folks, that's typically what we do. And the really good ones, they love to bring people together because we collectively determine the next steps. I mean, the really, really, really good ones, and if you're an asset manager, you don't do this, don't take it as a ding. It's just, when I found folks that are really passionate about it, they're like a Pied Piper. They will follow you anywhere. And why is that? Why is that? It's because no matter what, they're listened to. All the first lieutenants and the rest of the team, they're listened to, and they know they're respected.
Yeah.
So when we talk about policy in this case, whether it's the bank or the insurance, what comes to mind, right? Because in the bank, it's a small to mid-size type of organization. Mm-hmm. They have a little bit in there, probably more cybersecurity focused as far as policies. But what would you recommend from a policy for this happening, for this stance, to say, okay, because for the bank, they don't manage to seem to be well. They just don't, right? It's a happenstance. Nobody really trusts the data, et cetera. So how can policy and being able to use the system become more entrenched within their, I'll just say the DNA? What comes to
Mhm.
mind?
Well, I mean, there's some things that come from fundamental principles of accounting, for instance, and security around separation of duties, for instance, right? Anybody that's working, especially in either of these financial institutions, understands this. It's part of the coursework that they go through when they're either going through college to become accountants or work in finance, right? And it's something that they've come to understand and trust to as a fundamental part of their security, right? You don't go places in the space, right, where you don't normally do regular work on a day-to-day basis unless you're escorted or unless you have special permission to be there. And you don't go into these areas unless you have work that specifically needs to be done in these places through these mechanisms. So that's just an example, for instance, of that. And I'm sure that there are many others, just depending on how you look at it, what policies are in place, who gets to go into the vault. Is anybody going into the vault? No, only certain people are going into the vault. And typically that's the customer and an escort to a point, and then they're left alone if they have work to do within their own box that they have a key to, where they have access to. Those sorts of things. And remember, too, that, for instance, from the customer perspective, right, you want to know that your institution has good, strong policies that are going to keep you and your stuff safe, right? And if you just take that example, that could be applied every place else in the industry. It's applicable within hospitals and patient care and through HIPAA and the payment card systems and all finance transactions. I mean, you can just, if you think of an area, there's policy behind it and there's reason for that policy. There's bad policy too, if we want to get into any of that, but that could be another discussion entirely on its own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes for policy, for comes to mind, especially the smaller organizations, could typically you're rubbing elbows with the buddies, and I mean that being respectful of everybody, right? So it's good enough, and there's the trust environment, the small and mid-sized. Absolutely, it should be, because that's just the type of environment it is. It's much different than if you're working, say, like a Citigroup or State Farm or something like that, just a large enterprise, right? Or CNA Insurance or Home Depot, things like that. Just totally different. Um, where's my brain going on that? So where my brain was going is where policy comes into play. It's just more for protective measures. Is, say, your stock room. What gets checked in, what checks out. When that something goes in stock, you're actually able to capture. Here's what you need to capture at point of entry to get in the door, right? I'm just using as an example. In larger, smaller organizations, like, okay, put the boxes in the corner. We're going to inventory it later, et cetera. That should not be the case. Or if it is the case, do it. Say, I need 30 minutes to finish whatever. That needs to be done by the next hour, 2 hours, end of day, right?
Yeah.
To make that in place. That's a policy worth embracing, right? That's where I would go on that. Same could be for policy of software. Okay, if you're doing policy, and this is actually a really good one. I'm sure you've read this too. You cannot order software at all. It all comes through the service desk. That is a huge policy. And by the way, if you put on your P card or your credit card, you just bought some software for yourself. There you go. It's not company owned. You also cannot install it on a company device.
Right.
That's a policy worth enforcing, right?
Yeah. There's lots of good ones around that.
Yeah. That's just what comes to mind real quick, because again, when you talk about the small to mid-sized companies, you're trying to grow. You have a small entrepreneurial, you're trying to grow. And in this case, this is a bank. But you also have the government regulations on how these PCs need to be used, how they're going in and out, how they're being transferred, the security implications behind it, what software is on the device. We can keep listing it, right? And being able to say, you know what, I have to have policy around this because the government requires me to is one thing.
Yes.
How you apply it and how you work with others is also very critical in this juncture, because, again, back to the team. When you have the entire team that said, okay, we're putting the policy, and you explain to them, guys, we have to. The banking auditors are going to come in. They're going to ding us. We've got to solve this problem. Here's my proposal. What do you advise? And use them as a validation point. that's just another idea that comes to mind for me. I've had that work really well over the years.
I could give a really good example of one that sort of silenced a room for a few minutes.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. And this is back when I was at the Department of Environmental Protection, and I had charge over one division, the Division of Air's computer resources, et cetera, right? And we'd already been doing troubleshooting and desktop support for a while, and this was sort of our first brush into cybersecurity related issues, and a couple of really serious incidents that got some attention there for a while. But to the point, right, it had to do in a room of like about 100 people sitting deciding about a certain policy that's being implemented for the entire enterprise. And I had this opportunity to speak up. And when I did, I told them, I said, listen, I've got 97 users that I take care of, right? And we've got 200 different systems right now that they work with in order to do the jobs they have to do. And those jobs are mandated, right? So the thing that I put out there as a policy was this: understand there is zero, you should have zero expectation of privacy when you're working in government systems, okay? And the reason why that is because one, it's our job to ensure that those systems run as at 100% of the time, we can keep it that time for the uptime. Mm-hmm. And two, they work without error, without fault, without hacks, without viruses, all of this stuff. We're given charge over this. This is what we're paid to do. And this is what the people want for our systems, right? So the policy at the time, which hadn't been established, was started. And that is zero expectation of privacy when you're working in government systems. Like I said, yeah, there's probably some hurt feelings in the room, but you know what? I don't care whose feelings are hurt when it comes to that. I have this job to do, and I own that job. And absolutely, yeah, it definitely became policy at some point shortly after that.
Now, so there's one thing to put policy in place. You have the written word, right? Mm-hmm. What also comes to mind is, how do you measure that?
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about that the other day. Remember, I think that I brought up the idea, for instance, that, and how many folks out there right now in the audience, right, have a policy such as no portable devices, no USBs in your computers, right? That's a policy decision, right? So how is that enforced? On the back end, right, you have to have either KPIs or systems that detect it. So the moment that this thing goes into any comm slot on a PC, on a laptop, wherever your systems are working, that there's software that's present that says, hey, I've got a USB drive that's been attached. And that policy then is connected technically to a set of decisions, rules, flagging, etc. So the moment that the drive goes in, a message pops up on the screen. Your system's halted. Somebody will be in to see you shortly. And sure enough, there'll be a couple of burly people coming up there, knocking on the door. Hey, need to open up. We need to get that drive. It's not even a question of take it out. It's a question of we're going to grab the drive now, because you've just started an incident by acting against that policy. And how you do that up at the very front end, when you hire an employee, you got onboarding. Part of your onboarding package is, you got to watch this video and you have to sign off that you've viewed it. This is legally enough for us to say that you're aware of it. So if you break it, there's consequences, and you'll be made aware of those if you haven't already. So that's sort of like, that's policy, from the written policy, the language, to measurable actions and KPIs and or monitoring, all the way through to the action in the event of breach, in the event the policy has not been followed.
Yeah, it makes me think of a. So when I was, I've been in lots of different environments over the world over the years, and 30 years, you see lots of things. I've been visiting customers, best practices, and for all sorts of reasons, I can't remember who I was working for at the time. But I remember it was a government agency, a very prominent government agency, right? And I went to discussion because they wanted to say, okay, how can we work? What were we talking about? Had to do with. It was just tracking assets. They just want to have a best practice discussion. So, okay, fine, we'll go in and make it happen. I've been a lot of places. This one, literally, the laptop couldn't go in the door. I think the laptop had to stay outside. I've had a couple of those over the years.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't bring your own, or no, you can't bring any cell phones. You can bring the laptop, but no cell phones.
Yeah.
Cell phones stay in the car. Literally,
Yeah.
that's just how it works. You can't bring it around. You can do a laptop, but it's restricted. You're on your own, et cetera. So I'm talking with this government agency. I remember it like yesterday. It's in DC. I'm out there, fine. My rep is with me. We're talking about best practices. Okay, let's have a dialogue. I mean, anybody that knows me, I can talk for weeks about best practices. Best practice. We just have fun. How to collaborate. How to go to the next step. And I'm not talking about here's the manual. I'm talking about how does it apply to them.
Yeah.
So we're talking through it, and they said, yeah. I said, okay, so how do you manage your laptops? It's like, well, we've got RFID on these things. We know, et cetera. Nothing goes out of the building. I go, really? He said, yep, nothing goes out of the building. If it does, that revolving, they had a security that was that revolving door. It's kind of like what you see in hotels, but literally it was all secure with all windows. He says, yes, someone goes through that, it's in their bag.
Yeah.
The alarms will go off in the whole building. I go, dude, why? He says, yeah, don't try it.
Seems excessive, but still, there are reasons for that. I got a quick example, if I can.
Go for it.
I was one of the very fortunate people in my career. I was able to work at Motorola at the land mobile product sector assembly plant down in Plantation, Florida, once upon a time.
Okay.
They did bag checks upon entry and bag checks on exit. And this was policy as well, right? Now, the reason why, of course, was because deep within the manufacturing floor of the facility, right, one of the lines, right, was a 3:1, 6:1 digital compression line. But one of the customers for that line was a military customer and a foreign military overseas that had tight relations with our own government at the time. And so it was critical in order for them to maintain, let's say, the security certificate, if you will, for the line and for the facility, that these checks are put in place, right? And so you had to do that. If you wanted to work within the facility and you had the pleasure to work on the line, you needed to adhere to those things. It's just,
Sure.
No question about it. And it was very easily enforced.
It's all about figuring out, okay, again, there's the respect and appreciation for what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And even the agency where I was talking about, a lot of very critical information for the entire United States, right? Mm-hmm. For all the citizens, et cetera. It was very, very, very important, right, on that side. So any information got out whatsoever wasn't going to happen.
Right.
That's what they were looking at, right?
Yeah. Loose lips, sink ships.
Yeah. And so there's one thing to put policy in place, but let's embed this with the tooling, right?
Yeah.
How to use the tools, how to apply it, how to define those changes. Because what this also reminds me of, we can have a lot about the process, right? To me, things like this, say, okay, how you log it, there's one thing to say, okay, how you're going to receive devices, how you're going to capture it within the tool to make sure it's there so you can actually track it ongoing. Also, how the disposition comes in place. So how's it being used? How's it being leveraged? And there's lots of examples we can use on that, right? And a lot of automation you can put in place, barcode scanners, et cetera. So you have kind of the steps and you outline it. That's cool. But honestly, the thing I've always found the most, I'll use the word challenging, with the whole the operational side. I'll say that the core asset management is usually not too bad. The team members are going to be able to expand upon it. In your break fix teams, you just have to befriend them, and they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I need to do it now. I understand how you can help me and how it can help me, or how it can help me and how I can help you."
Yeah.
But typically, where most of the problems happen, at least for me that I've seen, isn't usually the desk side. Usually it has to do with the operations of the data centers and the servers.
Okay.
Change management. Change management. Being able to say, okay, again, we have the CMDB going online in both environments, right? You have the financial as well as banking.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to say, okay, here's what it is beforehand, validating that with your stakeholders with the change process. and also ensuring that the CMDB gets updated after the fact once that change request is complete.
Okay.
That's not an automated process. Some of it can be, but there's a validation that has to happen, right? That requires usually human interaction one way or another. That's where I usually see from a policy and tooling breakdown for any type of IT assets. What about you? Any thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a great tool that I had a chance to use, and that was also back at the Department of Environmental Protection. It was great, right? And it was Manage Engines as Explorer at the time. And now all of the tools have built-in functionality by now on this exact same thing, right? So from a policy standpoint, right, starting there, it's like nobody installs software except for approved software technicians or approved desktop support technicians. They do it. They're going to do it remote, or they'll come on to your site and they'll do that way, right? So now how the tool works into this is the tool gave us the ability, not that you couldn't do this through other tooling, to immediately detect a software installation in progress. The moment that it happens, we get an alert. It tells me and my 3 technicians, hey, there's an install and it's happening over here at the Division of Air, for instance. And it's like, all right, great. Do we have a ticket associated with that? What? No ticket. Oh man, that's an automatic flag right there. You need to get down to the bottom of that. So this is a way that a tool through automation can help you to protect your organization and help to enforce the policy around that, right? It was great, and then of course, once you get down there and you've got to deal with the people, well, for me, that's when the United States Marine Corps compulsory courtesy training played in heavily with that. And it's always a blessing. It still serves me today.
And when you grow like that, right? It's being able to help the entire team to have that clarity, right? Yeah, we're back to the teaming. And when they understand the granularity and how much it benefits the organization as a whole, that's not easy. That's not easy. What's the right word? I won't say business case. That's not easy case to make to everybody because you're actually putting additional workload on a person, right? But when they see the reality that workload is minuscule compared to the pain on the other side if it's not done.
That's right.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah. Take the example I just mentioned, We've had a case, we had a case, I think I described on another episode, where somebody decided to put a piece of software on an image, a base image that was going out to many machines, right? Well, that happened, right, in a way that even if the policy was in place and you push that stuff out through a technician, there are other issues there. All of a sudden, the amount of those installations, right, when it was time for renewal, because this is what triggered the audit, when it was time for renewal, they did a count based on what they saw, and they made that renewal request to the software vendor. Well, the vendor flagged that because, my God, you guys only have like 20 copies tops, right? And not 400 and something copies. And that was just for one division that flagged that, right? So they come back and now all of a sudden they got an audit letter on their hands because you weren't supposed to put that on a base image. IT asset management didn't even exist at the time, and then of course they weren't notified, those folks that were standing in for that team. Nobody knew about it. It was found after the fact because of the audit letter. That's the kind of thing that you also want to protect the organization from, especially. And it's where like all the money right now is through software asset management and in trying to prevent some being out of compliance. Well, that's a big out of compliance there. 20 versus 400 some odd copies just in one division. So yeah. And then of course after the fact you've got all the remedial action that you get to take, and then that informs policy. And I think that that's a critical piece. We're going to talk about that. Between the tooling and the other components around that, you've got to have that ability to examine what happened over the course of so many months or years, and then design your policy to prevent it or to mitigate it as quickly as possible.
So let me ask the question: when you did that with the team, right? What was the team's response?
Oh, well, leadership's response was, "Oh, how dare you?" You know, it's,
Okay.
but that's fine. That didn't bother me at all at the time. They were just puzzled because they thought that through authority alone, they were, how you say, controlling all of the environment. It was far from the case. Anybody could have
Sure.
crossed this policy or whatnot. But in my case, what I demonstrated to them was that they weren't bothering to do a proper software review in the first place, right? And then we were already looking at a tool at the time that was going to be considerably cheaper than the one that they had approved, and also give us dual functionality for let me see, was it a 3270 emulator, right? The 3270 emulator that they were using at the time didn't allow you to do a print session and a
Oh, yeah.
communication session at the same time, right?
Sure.
We found a product that did. It was easy to set up, and it was less than one third the total cost. And that was the audit case that where we took a $500,000 penalty. I took a $500,000 penalty, and I was able to reduce that to under $30,000. So there's tangibles. There's money, right? And if you can attach money or risk expressed in dollars to the effect of a policy or lack of a policy, now you're going to get the C-suite's ear because now they're interested.
Well, so let me ask you a question. So it's good. I'm going to. I love where we are, but
Yeah,
I'm going to put a little spin on it, right?
yeah,
Which I never do ever, right?
yeah,
Um, and here's the spin. So corporate, um, as far as organizations, I mean your large organizations, absolutely
yeah,
the money makes a difference like that.
yeah.
But I say, however, it's a better word. However, when it comes to government doesn't look at it the same way. Because I was told one time, I did talk about value and what you're going to see by putting policies in. I was working with a pretty large agency at the point. Yeah, actually, it's a really large agency. Um, and he said, "Great, awesome, you made the pitch. That's great. You make it happen. But Bill, I need to teach you something."
Mhm.
Okay. The government doesn't care how much money we spend. Savings is not relevant to us.
They had
Doesn't
more
matter.
dollars.
We have a budget.
They
What's
had
your
more
thought on
dollars than
that?
cents. They had more dollars than cents. That's what it was. I haven't met a government agency yet that's been like that necessarily. I mean, in some cases they do. That's the whole question of if you don't spend it in your budget, you're going to lose it next year. There's that
Correct.
argument, and I've seen that play out, in a number of places. But the fact of the matter is that if you can get something, that you have on par with or better for lower cost, right? That argument that they don't watch money isn't necessarily true. There are people out there within government that do. They take ownership
Well,
of
it's gotten better. Well, you look at well, we look at what's been
way.
happening the last couple of years. That's different.
But I think that what happens is it's like with bigger companies too. They have so much money that it doesn't really matter. The budgets are so huge that I can see where maybe they don't. I mean, that's part of the difficulty in selling IT asset management everywhere, especially for
Mhm.
large organizations. It isn't unless they get hit with a massive financial penalty that they're interested in putting what could be a tenth of the cost of penalty into forming a proper team and getting that funded and getting that on its way. If they
Mhm.
did, there's a tremendous amount of savings that could be had out there.
Absolutely. And I say this openly, right? Because there's that misnomer, and everybody says, "Oh, well," and to your point, okay, well, government doesn't have a lot of money, we're going to spend it, et cetera, but corporations have more. That's not the same anymore, right? Especially when you look and see how. I mean, I was just what was I was on a Gartner thing just recently. Um, Everyone wants immediate results or looking faster, quicker, whatever, or wherever you want to go with that, right?
More for
So for
less.
that, they're like for immediate returns, right? And this was because of AI, right? AI for their automation, how you embrace it, et cetera. And it's like, Bill, but where are you going on this? Because we're talking about policy and tooling. Well, the reality is, when it's all about policy and tooling, it goes back to value.
Yeah, yeah, it really does.
That's how. It was like, how did we just get the value? We just took a total left turn. It's like, no, we didn't. It's the evolution, right?
Sure.
But what we also need to realize is when we say mandate, which that's in the title, right? The mandate is a lot. It needs to be required, mandated, yes, but how it's embraced, you've got to work through the people aspect. It's not, again, not just slapping people on the hand to say, this is how you do your job. For some people will, right? It's just, that's how it works, and different individuals, which is fine. I fully respect that. But being able to say, how can we do this better? How can we further improve? How can you have a voice?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was part of an organization one time, specifically about, we're bringing on CMDB. I was bringing on the CMDB, actually. They'd done it 3 times in 3 years, and they couldn't get it done by an outsourced provider, one of those big VARs. And or whatever, the GSIs, global service providers, or integrators is what they call them now. Yeah. And they couldn't do it after 3 years. So I was there, and it came to actually helping bring the CMDB up. I wanted to see changes. I have the attributes going in. I haven't put it in there, but how do you, in this exact scenario, how do you enforce it, right? And I went to the change manager, an awesome guy. Oh my God, that guy. If anybody wants to know he's a good guy, the personality you want for a change manager, he was a chief on a ship. He's a retired chief from the Navy.
Okay.
Die hard, make it happen, by the book type of guy, down to earth, and understood all ITIL on top of it. But when he knew how to draw that, he knew how to put down the hammer, is the best way to put it, and do it tactfully, right? 30 years, I think he had 30 years on the ship, the different ships in the Navy. He'll learn by, says, and I went through it and says, oh my gosh, if we can actually get them to do that, it's awesome. So he and I actually applied it. We put it into change control, put in some additional steps to actually monitor the whole change management process for applications as well as servers. Desktops we did differently because how you do changes can be more automated that way. That's not a problem. Mm-hmm. So we went online, went live. Any guess what happened?
What happened?
It tanked.
Why?
No one wanted to do it. I had 2 outsourced providers. I was a contractor. I was working with 2 different outsourced providers, one for applications, one for the servers, and / data center. I had another, and plus the employees. Nobody wanted to go through the effort to identify, review, document, and also establish the task is going to complete, plus update the CMDB. Nobody wanted to do it.
They weren't doing change management then.
Well, I agree. Totally. But they said that's too much work. This went all the way up to the exact. I had the CIO. I reported like to 5 different CIOs, and I reported to CTO specifically. And he goes, okay, we need to sit down. Something's up, because I'm getting phone calls from everybody. It's like, yeah, you probably are. And I gave him a heads up it was happening. So, yeah, let's chat. And he goes, oh, wow. Yeah, we need to think this through a little bit. And he says, you just made it cause a major ripple. I told him, here's where it is. You need this done. He says, no, you make a valid point. But the problem is, how do we get the team on board? Because our outsourced providers weren't doing their job. That was part of the problem. They would install software, they would install the equipment and say, what are we doing there? Storage arrays. And we were turning everything from hard drives over to chips. So, I mean, talking about faster, quicker, et cetera, which is everything's on chips now. It's well beyond that. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't update the system, refused to update the system.
Yeah, that causes a lot of dissonance just hearing that they're not doing. What happens eventually is you get a failure, right? Your request doesn't go through, or worse still, you get an incident, and then everything's on fire, and you don't know how it got on fire. You don't know where any of that was happening because you weren't doing any change monitoring. And your CIs, I don't know how they're loading CIs, but there should be automated discovery in place. And then there should be, you have to check in on those things from time to time, right? That's why
Whew,
there's agents.
absolutely.
Or you put in agents that call home whenever a change is applied to the system, above a certain level. So yeah, that's impossible. There's no way you could manage a situation like that. I'm surprised that they even were able to do business as long as they were able to do.
Well, the reason why this is being so the reason why we're implementing the CMDB was actually so they better understood how to do budgets. They couldn't manage their budgets. We only had 1,500 servers. I mean, it wasn't huge. It was about that. We had about how many applications?
Yeah, see
About 200 applications.
That's actually a good example because this sort of like highlights the difference, right? You shouldn't be using the CMDB to manage all of your assets. It's a half measure. It's after stuff has been bought and not cataloged. It's after stuff has been installed, right? But you're not doing proper asset management and distribution of licenses. This is the whole reason why the CMDB exists. It's so that because you didn't do any of that stuff in the process and the life cycle up until you deployed it, it's that CMDB applies to the operational life cycle of objects and software that are deployed in an active state in the environment. It doesn't count what's on the shelf. You've got to have something, right, that actually, like stockroom, that actually tells you what you bought and where it is. And then once it's deployed into the environment, then that's CIs, that's CMDB, right? But the full range is asset management database from specification all the way to final disposition. The operational life cycle is just a small piece in the middle of that, right? And depending upon the use of the item, right, it can have more than one. Because today, I know you brought this up before, today your CI is a desktop computer. And then maybe later on, your that same machine, that same asset now is a kiosk machine. Right. And then the same thing a couple years from now, as it gets older, is now it's a display within a museum. So it has these different roles. Each operational role is a different configuration, and you can have an asset that endures multiple configurations before you finally take it out back and take the hard drive out and sanitize it and then sell it at your eBay site or at the flea market or send it for recycle or repurpose it with a charity, which I was able to participate in the charitable thing there for a little while. We had a great org that did that with old computers.
Well, so the biggest challenge that what I learned out of that whole exercise, right, is there's one thing to bring the technology online. There's a second part because of the different players involved, and I had like 60 plus stakeholders.
Yeah.
Getting that, I had literally 5 different CIOs because we had that many different divisions I was working with, and they all shared servers, etc. But to get the buy-in, that takes time. Now, I was told to just make it happen, so that's why I did what I did, right? And so you want to put down the hammer? Okay, I'll put down the hammer. I created the bottleneck. But sometimes that needs to happen in order for the awareness to be there, that where the real problem is, back to your point, right?
Yeah.
And that's what helped them to go, oh, wow, we didn't realize how much of this happened. I mean, it was pretty bad. Because when it came to all the changes, here's what I found out. Like I said, 2 different outsourcers. Now, some of them have more. Organizations are different. And this was not a huge organization. It's global, financial, a lot of money, but not huge. But they were huge because of the financial side, right? But being able to help apply, having everyone get their input and insight, I believe they had to put that. We actually found out that all of the providers, they didn't have in their contract that they needed to update the database. Therefore, they didn't do it.
Whoops. That alignment we keep talking about between business outcomes, IT, and ITAM.
Yeah,
Something was missed.
a lot of things were missed. I can keep going forever. I can talk about just that alone. And I learned in 18 months, I learned an eternity about all the rest of the
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, that's
Um,
terrible.
but I leverage as an example because that's also where you want to make sure when you put down the hammer and how you apply it, that who you're going to impact, give them a heads up. Say this is coming forthcoming, and you're going to hear all sorts of. I'll use the word whining. I'm just going to say whining. I'm just going to call it straight out. It's whining, right? You're
Yeah.
going to have people that say they don't want to do it because XXX.
Mhm.
Dot dot dot. Whatever that number is, it could be YYY. I don't know. It's probably not OOO. So there we go. But where I'm going with that is being able to say, be careful where you step. And I'm not saying not to do it, but also realize that you need to make sure the entire team's on board when you make changes like those. Now, it's absolutely needed. It's not just a best practice. That's something that everyone should be doing. The whole process and how you're stepping it, who's making the changes, how to review it, et cetera. And as far as taking time, honestly, if they skipped it, that means they've been cheating the system to me.
Right. Yeah, and they probably have been for quite some time. I
Yeah.
mean, when faced with a difficulty like that, with people who want to step up and bring concerns, some of those are going to be legit, and some of them aren't. Their
Mm-hmm.
nice idea to kind of counter that would be to say, take as much time as you need to, but put together a 3-minute business case as to why you believe this, whatever it is problematic, why you don't want to do the recording, why, etc. Right? And
Mm-hmm.
bring that business case to me. I want to hear it. Let's I entertain all valid arguments. And let's see if we can
Mm-hmm.
find a better way. Maybe we should put some automation in place so that you don't have to do
Exactly.
it.
I
Maybe
mean, I want to
instead,
automate as much as
yeah,
possible.
there's a
Absolutely.
lot of ways. A lot of ways to automate.
Yeah. You always want to do it. And I understand people are stretched. We're all stretched. Shoot.
Mm.
I was stretched before all of everything we do now as an end user support guy. And
So flexible, it hurts. Yes.
yeah. So there's also being able to say, okay, how can we, again, how does it help benefit the job? How does it benefit the role? How does it benefit the organization? And that's how you start getting additional buy-in. And people are always going to be naysayers because that's our world. That's our world is to consume those naysayers and say, you know what, you're right. However, where are we going to take that conversation? You look back to the benefits. And that's what a lot of us get stuck in because it's just our world.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, people tend to react to in that way as well. It takes a lot
Mm-hmm.
more energy, right, and effort to just gripe rather than the energy and effort that it takes to change your perspective a little bit, look at things more objectively, come up with the case, the real thing, to find improvements or to make the valid arguments around some of the more how you say the more objective things. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that there's a principle in psychology that I'm not privy to around that, but generally it seems to hold.
But it does because the thing as we kind of start wrapping up today's session is being able to say, how do we apply it? We have a major shift already happening. Maybe been good, maybe not been good. It's probably a little bit different for the insurance company, or I think we're hitting more of the banking part. That's probably the bigger challenge. But maybe but actually, I take it back. No, the insurance company is actually they're just now working on a formalization of like their business applications. So they're working on the relationships, right? That's a whole different struggle.
Yeah.
And if you don't have these policies in place, it will only compound downstream.
It'll catch up to you.
Yeah, it'll just only compound. So if you're able to address it now, it makes it much easier. And you're always going to have the naysayers. That's
Always.
But I think it's important. Maybe we can go down this tangent. When you hear a naysayer, just listen to them. Don't ignore them. Listen to them. They might have a legitimate point. That's great.
Right.
But they might also be your biggest supporter. You just don't realize it.
Yeah, they could be in the end, especially if you respond to what it is that they're saying in a way that is objective, and you realize, oh, there is value in what you're saying. You know,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
then that's that whole thing going back to they feel valuable and they want to contribute. And I think it's a good idea to don't dismiss naysayers. You want to keep a few of them around because you can go into these different projects with great exuberance, right? And look at those efforts in the past where they didn't land so well, or it took more than a few years to implement, right? And if that's the case, had you listened at least to some of the valid points naysayers are making, that might have influenced your strategy going into it, and you could have had more successful outcomes.
Because think about the only reason why the naysayer is speaking up is because they want a voice. They may be wrong. Some of them may want not average. A lot of them don't admit they're wrong, but they may be wrong with where we're going in because it's their perspective. But their perspective has insight to where the problem may really be that you're trying to solve.
Might be. Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a policy, tool, how you're doing deployment, maybe it's a handoff that's not working right, or an assumption everyone's making that just really doesn't happen, right? Maybe there's integration that needs to occur that you didn't realize was off the charts. It's like, oh my gosh, the whole technology, how do we miss that? It's like 90% of your problem is just this one integration by this person in the back room. They're doing it all manually and they're the bottleneck.
Yeah.
Not saying you're trying to replace them, but how can you further help them so they can be more strategic versus just doing data entry or validation or anything like that? There's all sorts of scenarios you can go behind that, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
So as we wrap this up, when it comes to the policy, the tooling, the application, again, we have two different environments, right? Any final wrap-up topics or discussion points you want to mention, everybody? Here as we come in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, just briefly, make sure that if you're going to set a policy, and you invariably will have to, just make sure that it's applicable. Make sure that it fits within the scheme of your business. Make sure that you have the means by which to detect and govern the policy and the adherence. And ensure that there's something also kind of on the back end, contingency planning, for instance, in the event of an incident or the event of a breach of the policy. And people need to be made aware of what the consequences are going to be for that. But they also need to be made aware of the benefits of the policy too. I think that if you don't do both, right, then you kind of do the policy and the organization a bit of a disservice.
True. My brain was just going somewhere and disappeared. So there it goes. So you see my brain just disappeared, it just went, floated off in the Neverland.
Yes. Sometimes.
I think the other thing about policies, a lot of folks struggle with creating policies. And the whole idea with that is be around a community and peers who can help you with that at different levels. Because you can do rudimentary type policies, maybe that's good enough for you. Maybe you need some more than depth. Lots of good examples I can see. I've done actually internet searches and Google searches to help with that a little bit because there's actually some that help you get that kind of the juices going. But be careful how far you go with policies because they can be very detailed and distract you from your day job.
They can, but that's when that policy creation exercise becomes important and make sure it's relative. Make sure it's relevant.
Yep. Yeah. And this is also where you work with all your stakeholders and start with governance. Because that's a good point. We hadn't even talked about that the entire hour. Is your governance, your stakeholders. When you start going down policy, make sure that they're on board. Mm-hmm. You might have suggestions. Maybe someone has a tip or trick to actually help you create a policy, or say, here's what we started with, and say, start with this and further build upon it. And now you build a team. You have camaraderie, and maybe that's the problem. Is there's not enough congruence with everybody previously on different policies that everyone ignored it.
You might have a policy creation group already within your organization.
Could be.
Yeah.
They're not as common as they used to be, but yes. Yeah. Well, Rob, it's been a great discussion. We're at the top of the hour. This CMDB just gets closer and closer to going online. It's great. We're getting closer. And sometimes we want to, and our goal here is to make policy so it's not hindering it from being productive and
Right.
constructive, right?
Yeah.
That's the other part. Just make sure you're, and from that, being able to say, it'll be okay. We're going to work through it. And that's what we've been talking. That's what you heard Rob and I talk to now for 2 weeks. Oh my gosh, that'd be 2 weeks.
It's been a couple
2 weeks now. Yeah, it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks today. For the last 2 weeks about the accidental CMDB. Sometimes we gain roles and different activities that we don't expect, get frustrated. Okay, why in the world? Because it's outside our own realm. And actually, it's one of the best exercises we could ever work with. CMDBs are not easy, though. we'll both reinforce that. CMDBs are not easy. It's in some ways, I'll stick with asset management versus CMDB. It's less noise. And I'll say then for me. But there is a lot of relevancy behind bringing a CMDB online. So if you can provide that additional detail and insight from a policy perspective and tooling to say, okay, here's how we're going to start measuring, and you're aligning with other regulations you have, governance you're under, then there's value.
Yeah.
Well, for the policy and tooling, we're going to call it a wrap for this session. And I appreciate everyone's contributions, insights, and if you're online, feel free to do it. I have friends all the time. It's like, God, Bill, just keep doing the ITAM Kitchen. We're loving it. It's like, put some comments out there. We feel no love. Come on, I'm just going to call it out. We feel no love. Put some comments. Put it out there. So I appreciate the verbal feedback. Honestly, I really do. So we're going to keep going. We're not stopping by any means because, as I was saying when it first started, there's nothing else like this, and we're just going to keep moving because this is where the magic happens. And hearing insight into that. For example, even governance today, you don't hear that. That's not published anywhere. But being able to go that next step. So when you think about what you do, how you do it, figure out how you can further enhance it. Ask your questions. Think those questions. Put the questions in the chat. We're paying attention to them. Be able to further drive that. So thank you, everyone, for a great session. It's been awesome. We're going to wrap it up, and I'll see you everyone on Friday.
Outstanding. See you on Friday. Bye for now.
See you then.